This video is to demo the changes that have been made in NextGen with the NextGen upgrade that will go live May 8th. The first thing you'll notice is in the patient info bar, the alerts module button is moved. There's been no other changes to the alerts button. The functionality is exactly the same. The button was just moved from under the patient's picture to over near the other module buttons. The next change is in the problem module button. If I hover, you'll notice there's a recent note field. This will bring in the patient's problem note that's been added in their chart. The next change is in the diagnosis button, module button. If I hover, you'll notice there's now the ICD code. This hover grid is still organized by encounter date, now includes ICD code within the diagnosis description, which was already there. The next change is in the medication module button. If I hover, you'll notice you now have a column for generic name. And then an entirely new button is the appointments. If you hover over this button, you won't be able to click and enter any type of grid, but you can hover and view any upcoming appointments for the patient. This will only show future appointments. And then you'll also have this new link. It's a labs link, and what it's intended to do is just provide a shortcut to the patient's results flow sheet. So you won't have the filter options that you would have if you actually enter the orders module to view the patient's lab results. But this is just a nice quick way to pull up the results flow sheet without opening a module. So it will open on top of whatever you're on in that screen. And you'll notice there's a few other places in NextGen that I'm going to point out. You'll have access to that same link. And then one final change that was made in the patient info bar is to the insurance. So in our current environment, you are viewing the patient's insurance, whatever insurance happens to be at the top of a patient's list when we load the insurance. So that may be their actual updated insurance, or it may just be what happened to be at the top of the list when insurance is loaded. Going forward, what you will see here is the actual insurance attached to a specific encounter. An example of that is this May 1st encounter happens to show Apple Health, but maybe this patient just switched insurances. If I go back to a previous encounter, I will notice what insurance was actually attached to that encounter. So those are the changes in the patient info bar. Next, I'm going to show you a change to the patient portal indicator. So you'll still notice in your bottom status bar, you'll have a little icon that identifies if a patient's enrolled in the portal or not. As you can see with this patient, there is the little blue icon, so that's telling me this patient is currently enrolled. But I do want to point out that we have some additional options which should make it a little bit easier to identify where the patient is in their enrollment process. So as you can see, that status indicator will still show down below, but now we have additional options of what will display. We will see the blue icon if the patient's enrolled. We'll see a blue icon with an exclamation point if their enrollment is pending, an X if the patient has declined portal, and a lock icon which will identify that the patient's account has been locked and an email was already sent. And that will probably happen if they plug in the wrong password too many times. And the gray icon identifying that the patient is not enrolled. For unenrolled patients, it is still important to identify that we offered the portal to the patient. So if a patient is 18 years old or older, we should still be telling them about the portal, and then going into the manage enrollment screen to capture the patient's response when asked. If the patient is interested in the portal, we would be using this area down below to identify that they're deferred enrollment, because they will go home and complete that enrollment. If they're not interested, we would be noting if they either decline to provide an email address, or they just simply don't have an email address, so they're just unable to enroll at this time. When you click OK, that will save the patient's enrollment indicator. It will change it from that gray icon saying they're not enrolled, but it will identify where they are in that process going forward. So let me go back into NextGen. Those are the core enhancement changes. We went over to patient info bar and the patient portal indicator. Next, I'm going to open the inbox. you'll see as soon as I open the inbox, there's one new field right away where your top tabs will now count how many items you have in that area. An example, as you can tell right now, I have 16 clinical tasks. What will happen, it's not working right now for me to demo appropriately, but you will also see a count when you open this inbox screen for your patient portal and your provider approval queue. It's just in a testing environment. It takes a minute or two to refresh, so I actually clicked in that area to bring up that number. But when you open your inbox, you'll have a count for how many items you have in each tab. One other minor change to the clinical tasking inbox, you'll notice that appointments module button has moved over, and that is now available in the patient's demographic on the right hand side. And you'll also have that labs link, which again is great because I can just click on this one link and it'll bring up the patient's results flow sheet without me having to go to their chart. So that is pulling up the labs for this Matt Lopez. I'm going to go over to the appointments tab, and again you have that same appointments module is now part of your demographics, and you have that labs link, but you'll also notice you have this new column here that's called wait time. And what that is going to do is it's going to track the patient's wait time from the moment their appointment, from the moment they check in through the chart being completed. So while not ideal in tracking the patient's wait time, it will start counting from the moment the patient is checked in and the front desk changes their appointment to CAB. So I'm going to move over to the provider approval queue. And here's where there are quite a few changes. So I'm going to just click on a PAQ item in this inbox. And you'll notice one significant change. Now when I click on a PAQ item, I now have the patient's full demographic section that is available in the clinical tasking and the appointments tab. I can view their future appointments. I can also open that labs link, and again it's going to pull up that results flow sheet right on top of what I've already have open. Or I can simply sign off. Sign off in the PAQ going forward replaces accept. It's just a change in the verbiage. I also have this brand new action. So for this home health PAQ item in this PAQ, I have the option of using a sign off with actions. So what that is allowing me to do, I can sign off on a PAQ item, but I can also just click on this button and I can complete some follow-up tasks at the same time. So in the moment I sign off, I can have some of these things launch or send as I select what I want to do. So an example of that, you'll notice one option that's grayed out is send to patient portal because this patient isn't enrolled, but I would have the option of, as I signed off on an item, sending it to the portal or locking the encounter or opening the chart. A few that can be really real time savers are the task options. Please be mindful these will not appear in a patient's chart history. So you won't see it as part of the medical record on the right hand side when you open the chart, but it will send a task to another user's inbox. So just to demo that, I'm going to select this task 1. I can change the priority. I'm going to assign this task, and I'm going to say that I want this to go to this. I'm going to pretend this PAQ item is maybe an abnormal PAP, and I want this to go to the abnormal PAP task group. So I'm going to add that group. And maybe this is just an FYI, so it would be appropriate to send this as really a secret task that won't appear on a grid or in a document. So I'm going to just say FYI and send this, if it were an abnormal PAP, to this group. I can run this action and sign off on this PAQ item and have this task go to that group. That is if I was doing this just as a one-time task. But if I wanted to save this, because maybe I use this function often and I'm frequently having to send things to this group, that's just an FYI, I can save this task and run it at the same time. Or I could just save it if I wasn't ready to sign off on the task. But in this case, I'm going to save and run the action. And I'm going to call this my abnormal PAP task. And what that will do is sign off on that action. So that's now left my inbox, but it will also save just using this tiny little arrow next to sign off with actions. it also saves that task for future use. So let's just say this next item, this consult allergy PAQ item, let's just pretend that was another abnormal PAP. I now have the option of using this tiny drop down and just selecting that action, which will then sign off on that task or that PAQ item and send that task to the abnormal PAP group at the same time. So I'm going to use this next PAQ action item, and I'm going to go back into that sign off with actions menu by just clicking on this button. And let's say I wanted to launch something in a patient's chart with this one. I have the option, and maybe for the type of task I send, I always want to launch a provider test action because I always want to document my requests. So in this case, I can use launch template, and I can select the template I'd like to use. In this case, I'm going to open the provider test action, so I can type in P to bring me closer to that selection in this really long drop down. And I'm going to select provider test action. And I'm going to open this in a new encounter. I would recommend, if you're saving these type of tasks for future use, it's easier to have them always open in a new encounter versus current, because you don't know if there's an unlocked encounter available. So it'll save a few steps to just let it always open in a new encounter. So in this case, this is something I'm going to use with this PAQ item when I sign off, but I also want it available for future use. So I'm going to save and run this action. I'm just going to call this launch provider test action. And OK. So you'll notice that that item will leave my inbox, my PAQ inbox, and I'm actually going into this chart because I asked it to launch a provider test action. So here I would then, because I asked it to launch in a new one, I would select my specialty, and I will X out of this because this visit type of chart update is fine. And here I can just type my note, and maybe this is going to my MA to please send lab letter. If there are common phrases I use and I'm building this to launch as an action that I want to launch out of my PAQ, I may want to put some of those common phrases in my phrases so that they're easily available when this template does launch in a chart. So from there I can save and task this to my MA. And I'm going to send this to the team. And then I can exit this screen as I normally would. So I'm going to go back to that provider approval queue. And you'll notice that item's also gone away. So again, I can now, taking the next item, if I want to just have this launch another provider test action, I can click on this drop down, and you'll see that launch PTA group that I've already selected. I'm going to send this PAQ item, I'm going to sign off and launch a provider test action again. So that item has now been signed off, and you'll notice I have a new encounter in this chart with the provider test action template that I can now use to send this, to document my next steps. So I'm just going to exit out of there and go back into the PAQ. One thing I can also do, if I've built quite a few of these, you'll notice I have quite a few, and some of them look to be fairly duplicative. I can go into this menu and maybe edit or remove some of these action sets I've already built. To do that, I would just click directly on Sign Off with Actions to open the menu again. And I'm going to use this drop down up top next to Action Set. From here, I can select a task maybe that I've already built, and maybe this one is fine, so I want to keep it. Then I can go into the next one that seems to be the same thing, and I can totally delete this action set so it won't appear in my drop down going further. And I can also edit any of these. So maybe this is one I built and it's just a secret task, but maybe I want to add to this one that I also wanted to launch a template. So I can add to a previously built action set if I needed to. And to do that, I would find the template that I wanted to launch. Maybe this one I wanted to launch a telephone call template. Again, I'm going to select new, and if ever I'm asking it to launch something in a chart, I just default to new from this window. I can save those changes. I'm not going to rename it, so I can just click OK. And I'm going to overwrite the previously saved rule. And now to exit this window, because I don't want to actually run this right now, I can click save after saving, or cancel after saving my changes, and cancel will just exit me out of that window. So to recap that, I can select the PAQ item, I can see a patient's demographics, I can go into their lab results, and I can also see their future appointments now. I even have that portal indicator at this level. I can simply sign off on actions, which in our current environment is accept. Or I can use sign off with actions. I can click directly on sign off with actions to build an action set that I can run just as a one-time action, or I can save so it's available for future use. Again, cancel gets me out of this window. Or I can simply take that PAQ item and I can use the drop down to the right of sign off with actions to select at sign off an action set that I've already built to fire off at the same time. An example of that is when I sign off, I want this action item to also launch a provider test action in this patient's chart. So those are the changes to the provider approval queue. There's no changes in the patient portal, so I won't go into that section. One final change in this upgrade, I'm going to pull up a document so you can see. I can't demo this in the actual environment. We now have available a list of custom denial reasons, and this will be available anywhere refill requests come through, so either in a clinical tasking, unmatched refills, or the medication module. And you'll see there's this list of custom denial reasons that are now available. We also at the practice level have the ability to create our own custom denial reasons. It's going back into the chart. Those are all the changes in this NextGen upgrade. Thank you.